I wonder if we can begin. Welcome, bienvenue, Madame Jalinas and your colleagues, welcome. Just before we do any point of order, let me go through the formality, Mr. Cullen. This is the meeting number 15 of the Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Pursuant to the Standing Order 108 subsection 2, study on the report 2006 of the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development. Witnesses that we have before us today, before the committee, are from the Office of the Auditor General of Canada, to wit, Madam Johanne Jalinas, Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, Mr. Neil Maxwell, Principal, Mr. Richard Arsenault, Principal, David McBain, Director in the Division, and Kim Leach, Director in the Division. And we welcome all of you. Pursuant now to Mr. Cullen, with respect to you have distributed a notice of motion. Do our members, before we go, Mr. Cullen has indicated he will do this very briefly. Do I have consensus with the committee before we have Mr. Jalinas, just to allow Mr. Cullen to briefly introduce his notice of motion? Okay. Mr. Cullen, very briefly, please. Well,
thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I just wanted to say that I am giving notice of two motions, one having to do with the EnerGuide programs and one having to do with the wind power production incentive programs. And just to give you notice that, in fact, I'm tabling them today, but giving you notice of these motions that we can hopefully discuss when we come back after the recess. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cullen. And members of the committee are aware that Mr. Richardson, the chair, is not able to be here today, so I will endeavour to do my best with the support of the clerk and the assistance of all of the members of the committee to deal expeditiously with the agenda. And having said that, Ms. Jalinas, we'll pass the floor. Won't pass the floor over to you, but you have the floor, and we look forward to your opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of Parliament. I'm pleased to present to you this afternoon my sixth report as Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development.
This report deals mostly with the federal government's approach to climate change, covering up to mid-June 2006. In the course of our audit work, we've tried to answer three basic questions. Is Canada on track to meet its emission reduction obligations? Is Canada ready to adapt to the impact of climate change? And is the government organized and managing well? The answer is no to all three questions. It has become more and more obvious that Canada cannot meet its Kyoto Protocol commitments to reduce greenhouse gas. In fact, instead of decreasing greenhouse gas emissions in Canada have increased by 27% since 1990. Let me walk you through now each of the 5 chapters of my report.
How the federal government is organized to manage its climate change activities, whether it is able to report the costs and the results of its efforts, and on what basis it developed key targets for reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. It also addressed new tools the government has chosen to help achieve its climate change objectives: a domestic system of trading greenhouse gas, and Sustainable Development Technology Canada, a foundation set up to help reduce greenhouse gas through technological innovation. Government action has not been well organized or well managed. The government has not defined its leadership role, nor has it identified the responsibilities of each department. It has been unable to come up with the basic tools that it needs to measure its progress. Even though more than $6 billion of funding has been announced since 1997, the government still has no system to track the spending and results of its climate change activities. In other words, the government has no way to report return on investment. Another major problem with the government's approach is its failure to address the biggest greenhouse gas emitters, transportation and heavy industry, which together represent the lion's share of all emissions in Canada. In the transportation sector, which produces 25% of all gas emissions, the only well-defined measure in place is a voluntary agreement with the car industry to reduce emissions by 5.3 million tons by 2010, which is only 2% of the overall reduction needed to meet Kyoto's commitment. In addition, we found that the agreement falls short in a few key areas for voluntary agreement, mainly the lack of a third-party independent verification of the model, data, and results that will be used to determine progress. As for the industry sector, which is responsible for 53% of all emissions, the government has steadily, since 2002, lowered greenhouse gas reduction targets. The reduction now expected from that sector could be only 30 million tons of a total of the expected 270 million tons of reduction needed to meet Kyoto's commitments. In other words, according to the data that we collected during the year's audit, the two sectors that are responsible for 78% of all Canada's emissions could contribute only around 20% of the expected emission reductions. Even if the proposed measures are implemented, they will only, at best, slow down the growth in greenhouse gas emissions, not reduce them. The two principal tools for reducing emissions, the system of large final emitters and the national emissions trading system, are still under construction after more than 4 years. Le chapitre 2 porte sur l'adaptation.
Chapter 2 deals with adaptation. Unfortunately, we found that adaptation is where the efforts of the government were especially disappointing. Despite commitments to take action going back to 1992, there is no federal strategy to specify how the effects of a changing climate would be managed. The failure to make significant progress on adaptation efforts risks Canadians' social and economic well-being.
Chapter 3 looked at 3 Natural Resources Canada programs that each received $100 million or more to reduce greenhouse gases emitted during energy production and consumption. The Wind Power Production Initiative for Renewable Energy, better known under the acronym of WIPI, the Inner Guide for Existing Houses for Energy Efficiency, abolished in May 2006, and the Ethanol Expansion Program for Renewable Fuels. We found that while these programs yielded results, it was difficult to assess whether they reduced emissions as planned because their targets were unclear. There was also limited reporting on the results these programs achieved with the money spent. We expected Natural Resources Canada to tell Canadians how successful the programs were at reducing greenhouse gases. But with unclear targets and inconsistent public reporting, we wonder how parliamentarians could assess whether these programs are working. Chapter 3 also looked at the federal efforts to tackle emissions produced by the oil and gas industry. We found that in its battle with climate change, the federal government has not taken into account the unprecedented boom in that sector. Emissions resulting from the increased exploitation of oil sands could double by 2015, canceling out any other efforts to reduce greenhouse gases. Le chapitre 4 porte sur les stratégies de développement.
Chapter 4 concerns sustainable development strategies. Our findings this year represent good news to a degree. In 3/4 of the cases we examined, departments are making satisfactory progress on their strategy commitments.
Chapter 5 contains 2 parts: the annual report on petitions and the results of an audit we conducted on a commitment made by Natural Resources Canada, Environment Canada, and Public Work to purchase 20% of their power from green sources by 2006. It is interesting to note that increasingly Canadians are raising the issues of climate change and air quality in environmental petitions. Canadians are informed and concerned about climate change. Most responses addressed questions raised. Some did not. An example of a response that did not address the questions posed is that of Finance Canada to Petition 158 concerning subsidies to the oil and gas industry and federal efforts to address climate change. Your committee may wish to get Finance Canada to clearly explain the extent to which the sector is subsidized. We found that the government has not been able to deliver on its commitment to buy 20% of its power from green sources by 2006, as it committed to in a response to a petition in 2002. It has not been contributing as expected to greenhouse gas emission reductions in Canada as a result.
At the end of our audit, my conclusion is this: the federal government has done too little and acted too slowly on Canada's commitments to address the challenge of climate change. Looking forward, a massive scale-up of effort is needed. I have identified 5 areas that I believe are crucial: provide sustained leadership, integrate energy and climate change, develop a plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, push ahead with adaptation, and assure governance and accountability. Each area is important, but the call for leadership by the federal government applies to them all. I believe that there is an important opportunity for parliamentarians to pursue the concerns I have raised in my report. Clearly, there are many issues that government officials need to explain, among them what progress is being made in developing a robust system for collecting and reporting information on expenditures and results. What was learned during the Treasury Board-led review of climate change programs, and how is it being shared and used? The federal government has accepted all of my recommendations. Therefore, I expect the government's new plan to spell out clearly how these recommendations will be taken into account. So when the new climate change plan is available, parliamentarians will be able to see how the government has responded to the specific recommendations made in my report and the 5 areas I identified as crucial to future progress. Mr. Chair, that completes my opening statement. Now, my colleagues and I will be happy to respond to your questions.
Madame Janina, and what we will do is that we will now commence with our schedule of questioning. I think you're familiar with that. But in this committee, it is 5 minutes for questioning, and I'd ask the members of the committee to address their questions through the chair as is appropriate. Thank you very much. Mr. Cullen.
Well, thank you very much, Madame Jelena, and to your colleagues for coming here today. A pretty damning report, I think. Now, the coverage, the period that you covered, of course, it was mostly during the period that the Liberal government was in power. You did some review, I guess, of what was happening or not happening in 2006. But it's fair to say most of your review covered the period when the previous government was in power. Is that right? Yeah.
We started to look at this issue back in 1997, really. So we cover approximately 10 years.
Okay. And then as far as the current government is concerned, I mean, I guess there's a phasing in period where they have to make an assessment, and at some point they need to respond and come up with a plan. So we're all waiting with bated breath to their Made in Canada solution. But it's interesting that they have accepted your recommendations, so the challenge now is to see how they respond to that. I'm not very happy with our performance as a country either, but I'm wondering what the information in front of me says that in the last 2 years of our mandate as a government, we started to see some progress in terms of greenhouse gas reductions. The first few years, I guess, there was, getting started, and frankly, I think not terribly focused effort. But is your information the same that towards the latter part of our mandate that we started to make some impact on reduction in greenhouse gases or not?
If we look at the 3 programs that we have looked at, the 3 that I mentioned previously, It is true that we were able to see some progress made, but these three programs, which were the most important one, would at the most achieve so far 1 megaton of reduction, and they were designed to achieve, the three together, 5 megaton. This is really one of the few areas where we can talk about progress, because for the rest, if we think of the emission trading system, the LFE system, developing a strategy for adaptation, these things were not really up and running.
Okay, I'd like to move to your finding that there's no sort of consolidated monitoring and reporting of spending and performance, and we're talking here maybe $6 billion. And you talk about the lack of a cohesive governance structure. To what extent is the lack of the monitoring and reporting related to governance, or is it just sloppy bookkeeping or performance management records? And what is needed to have a proper accountability structure so that there are accountable measures, reporting against performance, and a monitoring of what kind of value is being achieved for the dollars being spent?
A couple of points on that. First of all, if I go back again to the programs, at the program level, the departments, especially NRCan in this case, was able to provide some good information, even though if it took a while to gather that information. The information was there, but it was not readily accessible, let's say it that way. When you look at an issue like climate change, which is really a horizontal issue where many departments are involved, what we found is that every department and sometimes every program has a different way to collect the information and to wrap up the information. So someone who would like to get an overview of progress made in terms of results and spending, it's a challenge, and it's still a challenge. For example, you have talked about the $6.3 billion. That was money announced by the previous government up to the budget 2005. So these type of numbers are easy to gather. We just go back in the previous budgets. When came time to get the information about how much money was spent, it was really because of a question that was asked a couple months ago by the Committee of Environment and Sustainable Development that we have been able to have access ourselves to that information because the Treasury Board was gathering that information to respond back to the committee, because otherwise we would have had a lot of problem to gather the information. The reason is that there's no consolidated system within the federal government to gather that information and give accurate and update information on a short period of time, I may say.
I'm going to have to interrupt your 5 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Jelena. And Madame Duberfet.
Good.
Merci
beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jelena, for your presentation. Just to inform my colleagues, I mean, you are commissioner, and so you have to look at 25 departments that are looking at sustainable development strategies. It's important to clarify that role. My questions have to do specifically with the Energuide program. I am the new critic on natural resources for the Bloc Québécois. I would like to understand why the minister decided to cut that program. I saw in your report that the Energuide program had led to a 27% decrease in energy consumption, and that the department was looking at a 0.07 megaton of greenhouse gas emissions. From what I can tell, there was an impact there. It was perhaps small, but it is positive. I'd like to ask for your expertise on this. When assessors would go into homes to look at the house and offer advice to people in order to make their homes more energy efficient, did you consider that important for people so that we could indeed collect data and see whether the program helped in reducing greenhouse gas emissions through energy efficiency. Actually, the EnerGuide program was designed specifically to allow Canadians to improve the energy efficiency of their homes. The way in which it was designed by Natural Resource Canada officials, it was possible to take these measurements. When we looked into the program, we were able to actually access that information. So this is not a program which was poorly managed, far from it. The weakness that we identified with respect to that program is the fact that the targets evolved. They were not always clear. And the way in which the department reported on the results was deficient. Several questions were asked in the House regarding the striking of this program. And we were told that the assessment pre-renovation and post-renovation phase were considered administrative measures. And the response we got was that because it's administrative in nature, it's not a good investment for taxpayers. I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. The pre-assessment and the final assessment, do you think that these are administrative measures, or are they related to the program to assess its effect on reducing greenhouse gas emissions? This may be semantics, Mr. Chairman, but obviously the first aspect of the program is to audit homes' energy efficiency. And it's the result of this audit which will then allow homeowners to renovate their homes, refurbish them in order to improve energy efficiency. The Natural Resources Department's data is clear in that people could get an improved energy efficiency to the tune of 27% for their homes. It depends on how you want to look at these figures. It could be considered an administrative cost, but in this case, I would say it was an expense related to the program itself. And data collection would allow us to assess whether there was energy efficiency and therefore a decrease in greenhouse gases. The program does do that, yes. Do I have a moment left? Thank you. Did you assess or examine whether the research budget for the government, what percentage of that is set aside for natural resources, and where can we have access to these budgets for research and development? We can get some of that information on R&D, some information that we should look into again just to be able to answer your question. I don't think we could answer your question comprehensively at this point, but we could give you some indications if you'll allow us to get back to you at a later date. I'm sure my colleagues would agree to that. Thank you.
Any of your colleagues, please feel free to do that also.
Thank you very much.
The next questioner, Mr. Bevington.
Thank you to the Commissioner. I'd focus my questions around the emissions from oil and gas sector. And, quite clearly you say that with the expansion of the proposed expansion of this sector that will overshadow any other greenhouse gas reductions that we may make in the system. Maybe you'd want to elaborate on that a little bit.
First of all, Mr. Chair, the information that we got from the oil and gas sector has come in large part from the National Energy Board and were vetted by the Department of Natural Resources. What we have said is that if we look at the exploitation of the oil sands between now and 2015, the emissions will double on the assumption that production will triple, maybe quadruple. That information, when you look at the numbers, as we speak, the oil sands produce around 35 megaton of emission. So that will take us, if we double, to 17. And if you look at what was in place at the time that we have done the audit and what should be up and running in a couple of years, it's basic math, I will say, that whatever will be put forward in terms of efforts will never be able to reduce the emission. At best, might be able to reduce the rate of growth. And if nothing is done in the oil sands sector, that may not even be able to reduce the rate of growth.
Mm-hmm. So you know, the NRCan, federal government, has some division of responsibility, as you point out in your book, for energy, and you've mentioned the National Energy Board. Did you examine their mandate? Is the mandate of the National Energy Board such that that greenhouse gas emissions from projects could be considered in their development of these projects and their approval for these projects?
We haven't looked at the mandate of the National Energy Board. We have looked essentially at the federal programs, strategies, policies to address climate change. And having said that, it's important also to highlight the fact that we haven't looked at what is going on in the industry per se. And there must be technologies in place, energy efficiency program in some of the facilities to reduce greenhouse gas. Our mandate was really to look at the federal government.
But if the federal government needs to produce a strategy for greenhouse gas emission reduction and it doesn't have control over this sector, then the strategy is going to be very difficult to be achieved. So you didn't look at any of the tools. You mentioned some tools here in terms of the constitutional division of responsibilities for energy. Did you draw any conclusions about any of the tools that could be used by the federal government to rein in the emissions from the oil and gas sector?
First of all, we haven't looked at strategies because there's no strategy as we speak, so we can only audit what exists. And we have also, in terms of tools, we have said in many different places in the report that the government, the federal government, even though if natural resources is a shared jurisdiction, the federal government has a lot of tools in its toolbox. It can be voluntary agreement, can be regulation like SEPA, it can be also tax incentive. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be used. The reason why we have said that the oil sand has not been tackled by the government is that when you look at the overall programs and strategies that were put in place, there was nothing really to address this sector in particular.
Oh, yeah. So you talked about the carbon dioxide capture and storage initiative, and there's one project in 5 years that's been up and running, and it's reduced. It's taken its target of 3.5 million tons and reduced it by 2.5%. That's correct? And my question, did you look at the validity of the costing of this program versus the results that it was delivering?
I will go with your latter point, and I will ask my colleague to give you the detail on the number that you just mentioned. I don't know all them by heart. For all programs that we have looked at, we haven't done a cost-benefit analysis, so we cannot comment on the efficiency of the programs. We only look at 3. If you take the example of natural resources, there were more than 30 programs that we could have looked at, but we decided to focus on 3.
I may add something. The oil and gas sector is part of the LFE, the large final emitters. And the previous government was going to regulate that sector through the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, which is an act that serves to protect Canadians, pollution prevention in terms of our air quality, in terms of our water quality, in terms of our soil. So LFEs, oil and gas sector is part of LFEs. They're large emitters. And there was a target that was being negotiated with industry. It was obviously being reduced with time, but at least it was a start.
Thank you. We're out of time on that one. Thank you, Mr. Bevington. We'll go now to Mr. Paradis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 questions. One is more general and another one is more specific. Madam Commissioner, thank you for being here today. So, Madam Commissioner, I recall that we spoke in the spring And here in the committee, we were talking about your 2005 report. There are some troubling aspects of it that are coming back to the fore, and I find it sort of interesting that my colleague across the way would say that there's been an improvement there. You mentioned that there was a lack of leadership, which explains the quagmire we're in today. I'd like to understand those 5 points that you raise in point number 25 of your presentation. We know that billions have been invested to fight these greenhouse gas emissions, and that hasn't led to any results. And are those 5 points perhaps a solution for us that we should focus on more specifically to ensure that the money that is invested is actually used, actually helpful? Leadership can be expressed in several ways. On the political side, from the highest levels of government, also within public administration. It's got to be clear that when there is a national objective, that it's a common objective, that be evident in the departmental priorities. Also, it can express itself through federal-provincial relations. Also, the industry's desire and will to look into solutions and find them. And obviously, leadership is cross-cutting in that way. The government is going to have to be a leader if we want to really deal with this issue, given the results we've had so far. There are persistent problems that are not going to go away. For instance, the issue of governance and accountability. At this point, these are not problems that have been solved. If you wanted to have the most accurate, most up-to-date information tomorrow morning, you'd have a great deal of difficulty accessing that information because the system does not exist. It hasn't been set up. It's important for parliamentarians to make sure that the commitment to implement this system, that go through as soon as possible. Over a number of years, there was some talk as to the issue being handed over from one department to another, from one minister to another. So that means there's a lack of momentum, and that means that there has been a bit of a slide there, and we have these results to look at. Okay, and my other point is, we see that this current government has committed to its own green plan, and there have been positive comments from the Minister of the Environment for Quebec stating that he was quite confident about the way things were looking. And I saw also that you mentioned incentives at a provincial level. It's sort of having a leveraging effect on other things that the federal government is showing some leadership, and I'm wondering if this will have an effect over the future. I'd also like to get back to the Energuide program. In your report, you state, and I think you repeated it today, that the targets, and I just want to find your comments. I don't want to misquote you. Well, I won't look for that now. That the targets were not clearly defined. So this is my question. We know that there's been a lot of retrofitting that was done by people in their homes, and it would probably have been done anyways. A lot of people may say that. There's a great deal of speculation about that. Is that an example that you use to say, well, there was it wasn't well defined, and that we need to be more specific on that? On your final point, the Energuide program, although the targets were not well defined, they evolved. They were well defined at first, and things evolved, and the necessary adjustments were not made. So it cannot be said that the program was not well structured or not well managed. As to whether people would have done renovations anyways, well, I clearly can't answer that question. But I can say, Mr. Chairman, in 2003, when the government added on top of audits, energy efficiency within the Energuide program, we saw that there was also a growth in interest amongst Canadians, that they were looking at these subsidies, and we had to have an assessment done ahead of time. With respect to leadership, I would say that auditors always want to see results, and we cannot base our decisions on words alone.
Thank you. Members, we'll now go through our second round, and I have Mr. Saint-Amand, Mr. Ouellette, and Mr. Allen on this one. Mr. Saint-Amand.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Gélinas and other panel members for your work on this and for your cogent presentation today. If I can summarize at least components of your report, it seems to me that Canadians, arguably more than ever, are aware of climate change as an atmospheric problem. Certainly the surveys and anecdotal evidence would point to Canadians being engaged in this process or in this issue. And your report recommends, among other things, that the federal government must show leadership with respect to climate change. Is that fair to say so far?
Whoever will be the government of the day, leadership is needed.
Yes. And to this point, having studied the issue for over a period of time, the money was seemingly allocated to a greater or lesser extent, some $6 billion. It would seem that as a reflection of that allocation, the political will was there, if I may, but that the reporting techniques, the missing of targets and the tracking of results came up rather short. Is that a fair summary?
It's more than that. Tools that were announced as of today are not up and running. And if we, again, look at the two key sectors, transportation and the industry sector, beyond some approaches that were proposed, there was really nothing that could have given us some very strong indication that we were going to achieve the Kyoto target. So it's more than just a lack of good accountability and good system in place so that we can track money and results. It's more that what was put in place, if we go back in 2000, 2002, and 2005, the three plans have not achieved as much as they should have.
If I can just then be a little forward-looking, I'm looking at Chapter 3, Ms. Gélinas, of your report at page 22, paragraph or item 3.61. And you make a recommendation that Natural Resources Canada, on behalf of the Government of Canada, should make clear to Parliament by the end of 2006 how and to what degree the country will reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the oil and gas sector, both in the immediate and longer term. And then I presume what follows is essentially the response from Natural Resources Canada. Fair to say?
Yeah.
Now, at the risk of sounding partisan, Natural Resources Canada's response, in my reading of it, falls rather short in terms of meeting your recommendation. And I'm wondering if you could comment on your level of approval or disapproval of NRCan's response to your recommendation, because NRCan has less than 3 months to comply with the recommendation.
There's no time frame to respond to our recommendation, first of all. If I may just put what you have just referred to in context. The paragraph before was referring to some kind of commitment, I will say, from the Minister of Natural Resources, Mr. Gary Lunn, when he testified before the committee, saying that the department was in the making of developing an energy framework or a strategy. I mean, it's not clear which word that will, regroup what they were working on, but some sort of synergy document. And what we have said, and that's what the recommendation referred to, is that the government should come clear in terms of what it intends to achieve in that sector and what is the overall game plan in Canada with respect to energy. How the government will reconcile energy development, economic growth in this country, and greenhouse gas reduction. With respect to the response, you're right to say that it's vague, to say the least. And this is why I have said that when the government plan or approach will be publicly known, it will be important, especially for you, because I will not follow up on those recommendations in the near future. So it will become extremely important for the committee to ask the government how it has factored in my recommendation in their plan. And my understanding is that the government has said that they will come back and explain exactly how that was taken into account.
Thank you, Ms. Jellin. And Mr. Ouellette?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Pardon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I'd like to say that I find the Commissioner's role, that of the Commissioner and her associates, is very important, and to what extent we appreciate her presence, in fact their presence here, and we encourage them to do their work, which is truly fundamental to us. Ms. Jelina, in your 2006 report, you reaffirmed the importance of leadership. It's something we raised earlier on. And you're talking about a clear strategy on the part of the government with respect to sustainable development. To your knowledge, do you know if the Department of Natural Resources started to come up with some kind of a national strategy for sustainable development? You're referring to sustainable development, is that correct? Yes. Well, perhaps I'll defer to my colleague. Well, I could certainly remind the members that each department is responsible for a sustainable development strategy, which has to be revised and reviewed after 3 years. In a few weeks or a few months at most, departments will have to table before government their new strategies. With respect to the Department of Natural Resources, over the years, it has been said that there's been a great deal of progress with respect to the commitments that they've made, the commitments that have made a difference, and in terms of honoring their commitments. As a commissioner, I will always say that more could be done, but overall, the Department of Natural Resources, I would say, has done and does very good work. Perhaps my colleague will have a few words to say. He's the specialist on that, on those strategies. Yes, allow me, I'll answer in English.
Opportunity to bring to the committee's attention one of our ongoing concerns, which is, as the Commissioner has talked about, this particular department responsible for strategy and what it's done, but also the fact that the federal government still hasn't produced an overall strategy about sustainable development. And that's been a concern that we've raised in reports now for a number of years. It's a commitment that Canada has made going back to 1992. It was a commitment that was made most recently by the government to produce by mid-2006, and we're still waiting for that long-awaited strategy. Merci.
Vous dites dans votre rapport, la production.
In your report, you say that consumption and production of energy are a challenge in terms of sustainable development because these activities account for over 80% of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. NRCan is the department that is responsible, first and foremost, for the energy sector. The commitments with respect to the Sustainable Development Strategy are but a part of the department's strategy in this area. So what are the strategies? You're saying that we need to come up with new strategies, but what were the strategies that existed in the past? Were you in a position to assess what existed in terms of strategies? You're talking about sustainable development strategies here. within my mandate, I must report on sustainable development strategies each year. There are over 30 of them, and to give you an idea of this, there are over 2,500 commitments within the machinery of government, and of course I cannot look into each one of these. Every year we look at a number of departments and a number of commitments made by these departments, and then we look into the issue and audit. We decided this year to take a different tack, respecting sustainable development to go along with our report. So I cannot give you a specific answer with respect to the strategies, but I can tell you that, unfortunately, strategies were never focused on sufficiently. And if this committee, as a Natural Resources Committee, wants to know what the Natural Resources Department strategies are, I would invite you during a hearing to ask questions about their strategy. There's a bit of everything there. Thank you. Do I have? Thank you. It was raised earlier on the issue of the RNNR program. I see that you mentioned that in your speech, and you said you can't assess it. There were $500 million that had been earmarked for social housing. No one would have done that, really. I think someone else mentioned earlier on that people would have done that refurbishment work anyways, even if they hadn't gotten help from the Government of Canada. The government spent $1,456 in each case. If you look at the industry as a whole, and in fact you say it, that there was a 27% increase in energy efficiency. So in Quebec and Manitoba, you're looking at $500 and $750 in the rest of Canada. So that's a 200 to 300 payback. I think that's great in terms of energy efficiency. It's fantastic. I wish I had a brain to calculate things as quickly as you did.
That is made, and you may want to weave that into a future answer, but we're out of time on that one. We'll go to Mr. Allen.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman,
Thank you, Mr.
and thank you for everybody for being here. I'm going to focus, my questions are going to be on the governance side and the accountability side. In the report, it talks, in page 1 of chapter 1, it talks about responding to climate change and management across multiple departments and the challenge of that, and also that levers resources and expertise to manage this adequately. And then we go future and further into the report on page 10, where it talks in 115 and 116, where it talks about the 1998 report saying we had sporadic performance, and then in 116 where the 2005 Standing Committee on Environment reported, and again there was no leadership of the structure. But I want to point to 121 says Environment Canada currently has a lead and responsibility. Then there's other statements which says that the Treasury Board Secretariat should take a lead in these programs that go across. And then we had the Climate Change Secretariat, which was phased out in 2004, which had a leadership role. So how can you help me reconcile all these people who were in charge, and what are your thoughts on that?
That's the problem.
It's a challenge, and it has been a problem that we have faced for a while. I guess Richard will be better positioned than me to give you the detail and reconcile what is the status as we speak.
Yes, climate change obviously is a horizontal issue touching a number of departments and central agencies. Leadership was given at different times to Environment Canada and Natural Resources Canada on this. There was a secretariat that was reporting to the deputy ministers of both departments at one point. It was serving a purpose of coordination, federal coordination with the other departments and facilitation, and as well reporting. Since they've disappeared from the horizon, no one has replaced them. Treasury Board got involved at one point. The central agencies decided to get involved when, the decision was made to ratify Kyoto and all that. So they decided to take a more of a leadership role in terms of trying to put in place the structure that was needed. They decided to produce what's called an RMAF. It's kind of a big plan, a map of all the programs, the federal programs, just to find out what exactly is going on in all these departments. Because once you have this map, you then can come up and do a program review. and that's what they were trying to do. What they also tried to do is put a system in place to capture the information that was needed in order to do proper management of the fire. So they wanted to know, how much money has been spent on these programs overall, and what results have been achieved. There was a program review. The results have not been transmitted yet to Parliament or to Canadians. There's certainly a lot of information there. That was the logical sequence to do it, but they came very late in the process. A number of programs were in place. They were not talking to one another. They were not connected. They might have had caused some duplication in some case. No one knows. The program review was the way to do this. Now, when we looked at this, we saw as well transitions going on. Transitions between governments and transitioning key people in the civil service that deal with this issue. So this transition of people also caused some more delays. So essentially, the situation was not a clean one. And now when we were looking at making recommendation to the government, we wanted to make certain we were going to be addressing the recommendations to the right bodies of the government. And so we were going to go to central agencies, but central agencies told us, we are not responsible for this. We are there to assist departments and ministers. And therefore, they said, Environment Canada is the leadership. That's why we have this story that is kind of complicated in the chapter.
Do you believe that the program review has taken into effect this roadmap, if you will?
Yes, the program review has looked at the roadmap, but the Treasury Board has said that there are things missing in this big roadmap. And one of them is the governance piece. And another one is the performance management piece. So I guess in 2004, 2005, things were starting to get in motion in a positive sense, but were never completed.
Okay.
As far as we can see.
It led me to my next question then. We've talked a lot about some departments are stronger in their management systems and reporting systems than others, and it shows when the results in those departments. Given a firm commitment by the government that we're going to put the governance in place, in your estimation, how far away are we from setting up the management systems and information systems to collect this data?
Well,
Go ahead.
The Treasury Board has been working on a system, an electronic system to capture information, but this information obviously comes from departments, and departments have different definitions of what they're doing. So Treasury Board was trying to facilitate a process where everyone would work from the same page. And I think they've progressed in terms of doing that. And the idea was that once the program review was completed and decisions would be made, the information in the system would be updated. And they also made a commitment to make it transparent and available on a website, which has not happened yet.
And we don't know how far away we are.
If I may just give you some time frame. The governance structure, Treasury Board hasn't committed to any date. With respect to the performance framework, it should be available by mid-2007.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll now go to our third round, and Mr. Russell, Mr. Trost, and Mr. Cullen. Mr. Russell.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to everybody this afternoon. I apologize for the blackberry. It's a bit of a cultural shift for me, seeing that blackberries are usually better in puddings and buns in Labrador than they are ringing next to your ear. But that having been said, I'm glad you're here. Just a couple of comments. First of all, I was in a community of about 250 people this summer. And one of the elders in the community was telling me, there's less ice, less sea ice, and this is something that's been going on for years now and that type of thing. And he was saying, we're going to have to change our snowmobile trails. And I was thinking at that particular point, if we have to do that, it's going to cost more money because we're going to have to build them over land instead of across sea ice. It's going to take more time for the movement of goods and services. And it just struck me at that particular time how important this whole issue is and how it affects people in a community of 250 and how they're becoming, I guess, in tune with not only a local, regional, or national problem, but an international problem and challenge. And in that context, I'm just wondering, the Kyoto protocols and the targets that were set out, what's your assessment of how important these protocols are, these international targets that have been set, and in Canada reaching or attaining to those particular protocols and targets, because there's some talk of only a made in Canada solution, and I don't see it as an only Canada challenge. It is something that the global community has to address as well. So, and I'm just wondering about it because, you know, the current government seems to think that the Kyoto Protocol is not that important.
The only thing I can say, Mr. Chair, about that is with respect to the target that was set up by the government when it ratified the Kyoto Protocol was not based on sound analysis. I mean, as we were doing the audit, it became obvious that this number was not supported by any kind of very strong social, economic, and environmental analysis. So then the question is, what is the cost of achieving the Kyoto Protocol? I guess nobody knows. What is the cost of inaction, though? That's another interesting question, and nobody knows, because we don't do those kind of analysis. At least we haven't seen anything in the course of our audit which will have support that. And then the third question is, what is the cost of adaptation? And when you're referring to what is going on up north, Neil and I had the privilege about a month and a half ago to go to a remote island in Nunavut, Iqaluit, and I have heard the same anecdotes, if we can call that still anecdotes, because we hear so many of them, and it's not clear how the government will manage adaptation to climate change, which you have to remember is also a component of signing the Kyoto Agreement. There were two components to the agreement: adaptation and mitigation. So reducing greenhouse gas, but also getting prepared to adapt. And there's nothing in the books which will clearly identify that the government has gotten prepared to move in the direction of adaptation.
Just to follow up on the Inner Guide program, what would you say were some of the successes of that particular program? Could you just reiterate? Because it seemed like of all of the in all of your critique of the environmental programs that are in place, this one seemed to have some positive light shown on it. What would you say were some of the positive attributes around the Inner Guide program? And are there things with the Inner Guide program or in the model that was used or the structure it had or the reporting that it had that we could use in other programs that may be developed?
What we have said about the programs is that they were achieving results. Maybe not as much as expected, but they were planned to achieve their targets by 2010. So we have to wait and see if they're going to get there. So far, the two ones that we looked at, WIPI and Inner Guide, have achieved so far 1/3 of their objective. So they were moving in the right direction. Some of them was just at the beginning of really taking on, I will say. So we don't know how much these programs would have achieved or will still achieve.
Thank you.
Jack, we've just come to the end of that time period, and we'll go to Mr. Trost. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'll start off by making a little bit of a summary of one thing that I don't know if you really answer. But the one question I do have that again, I don't know if we'll be able to answer today, is are we sometimes looking at leaves and not seeing the forest? There are other environmental problems out there too. There are other ways of tackling this. I mean, I look, Canada is about 3% of the world's carbon dioxide human emissions. When China, Russia, or places like that particularly get rolling, what's 3% in the overall world scheme? So I sometimes wonder if maybe we're looking too close to home or maybe not concentrating, because this is not a zero-sum game. Technology exports to help China clean up a coal problem or something like that might be a better way to tackle some of this. Just blue skying here, or even looking at, as the Minister of Environment pointed out, there's other environmental problems. I mean, 3% out of the whole world's carbon dioxide emissions, even if you accept absolutely everything. it's an open question of what it would do, and that's something that's seen. And I know that's not something addressed in the audit per se, but it's a broader question which we as policy people have to deal with. I guess the one thing I would like you to comment more on that struck me as I read the report, and I didn't peruse it in detail, but I did try to read as much of it as I possibly could and skim through it, was continually it was coming through about lack of information, difficult to assess, knowledge to assess, cost of goals, etc. And well, Mr. Allen dealt with that by talking about governance and control. I guess the overall question I have is this. Well, the governance may be one portion of it. How much data collection is there that's accurate and analysis that is totally broad between the departments? Does it vary greatly? And I don't know if I'm expressing myself, but does it vary greatly? Because to make an accurate decision as policymakers, or to make accurate assessments of its working, you actually need very detailed data. You need the economics, you need the science. It's very complicated. Do you, in your opinion, were the departments collecting the data sufficiently? Did they have enough data? Was it just management of data that was a problem? Or was it the underlying lack of data that they had in total to make the judgments? Because it's one thing if they just have the data and misused it. It's another thing if they didn't have the resources to get that. So if you could make a judgment, if it's the same all across the board, just say it's same all across the board. If different departments did better, I'd appreciate if you outlaid your opinion on which departments performed better and which departments performed worse. Is that clear?
We haven't made a comparison among departments. What I can say, and I will let Richard give you more detail, is that the data are good. And if I'm right, even the international community has acknowledged the quality of the inventory work that Canada is doing. So the foundations are very good.
No, I'm not just talking about calculating the amount of carbon dioxide tons, everything, but actual analyzing cost-benefit analysis when it comes up.
I'm getting there. Okay. So the foundation is good. So I don't think that there's a need to discuss that. The analysis, it depends. Sometimes it's obvious that there's a lack of analysis, and we have referred to that many times. Now, you may have access to much better analysis now that the program review of Treasury Board has been done on most of the programs. And when you will get access to that information, you will be able to judge the accuracy of the information that is provided to you. If we take the example of adaptation, the information is there. There's a good chunk of information, but that information has not been translated for decision maker. So it depends where you look at. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's weak, sometimes it's getting there, sometimes more work is needed to be able to have good information. So it's not a one answer for the overall activities of the government with respect to data and monitoring.
For one short question, Mr. Jones.
Well, I'll just say that was my basic point, because when we give advice, are we going to give advice that says the information is there, just coordinate it, or go back and get more information? I think you answered that, but I think you also, reading between the lines, says it's really going to vary department by department, program by program, correct?
True, but also topics by topics. Like adaptation may be different than gathering information with respect to spendings, for example.
Thank you.
Ross, thank you, Commissioner. And Mr. Cullen, we'll now go to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to touch on two areas, the oil sands and then the Energuide and the wind power production incentive program. So on the oil sands, based on the way it is proceeding today, would it be your assessment that that would be a sustainable approach to the oil sands based on the scenarios that you're aware of today? Is that going to be a sustainable way to proceed in the oil sands?
If I knew that answer, a lot of people will be running after me to get the answer. I don't have the answer for you.
Well, I would suggest to you, Madam Commissioner, that it's not sustainable. I guess it depends how you define sustainable, but if you look at the increase in the greenhouse gases, the CO2, if you look at the way that the water is being dealt with, and if you look at the impact on the local communities, I'm not sure, the way it's progressing today, I'm not sure that it is sustainable. But another aspect of that would be there are many propositions that come up from time to time. Today we hear that Encana Corporation and the U.S. giant ConocoPhillips are talking about a joint venture so that oil sand production would go into refinery capacity in the United States. Now that raises up a number of political questions and other public policy issues that I have a certain, perspective on. But is that the kind of thing that you would look at in terms of whether or not this is a sustainable approach? And the second part is, we hear a lot about carbon capture and sequestration. We hear a lot about recycling water, but those technologies are not in play yet. And how long will it take to get them into play? Could the federal government, for example, redeploy some of the tax expenditures that go to the oil and gas industry now, which I've got some research on that, which tell me that it's about $1.2 billion to $1.4 billion a year in tax expenditures to the oil and gas sector. Why not redeploy those resources to accelerate the development and the deployment of technologies that are going to capture and sequester carbon and deal with the recycling of water?
Mr. Chair, these are policy decisions, but I would like to add two things. It's not up to me to decide if we are moving on a sustainable path or not in Canada. But I will remind you, though, that any new policies or program which is developed by the federal government should go through what we call a strategic environmental assessment, which means that the bureaucrats, before they design the policy or the strategy or the program, should look at the environmental impact, the social impact, and the economic impact and take the best decision. And this analysis should be made available publicly. So then people will be able to judge what work was done before the decision was made and judge on the merit. But as you know, my job is to give you the information, and then you're the one who are making the judgment.
Well, with respect, as the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, I would think that you might have a view on whether or not we are proceeding in a sustainable way in the oil sands, but I'm not going to pursue that. I'd like to come back with a quick question on EnerGuide and the Wind Power Production Incentive Program, which have been frozen by the government. We heard from NRCan officials that there had been some Treasury Board evaluations, and I thought I heard the NRCan people say, but we haven't actually seen them. That struck me as somewhat odd, and frankly, I think we need to call the Treasury Board people here to explain what work has been done. Have you actually seen the evaluations that Treasury Board has done, and what did they actually say?
I think we have seen part of the evaluation, but we haven't had access to the document that were sent for cabinet decision. So this is not something that we have access to.
And the ones that you saw, were they highly negative or positive with respect to, let's say, EnerGuide or the Wind Power Production Incentive Program? Or
I don't know myself.
It was variable, and the Treasury Board had criteria to evaluate. First of all, if a program that was submitted was truly a climate change program or something else, because often departments mix the two. It wasn't a program that was providing benefits from a standpoint of climate change, but the program was more an environmental program dealing with some other issues. But in terms of the results, again, we cannot speak of those because they were submitted to Cabinet for approval, and we didn't have access to the information. But we know that they've followed a very rigorous process. Departments were involved. The information was provided, was returned in some cases to the department when it was not complete or was not following the proper framework, and then they were moving like that to get something that they could make decisions on.
Okay, we're out of time there, Mr. Cullen. But Mr. Cullen, just with respect to that line of questioning, just to remind members of the committee and perhaps to inform Madam Commissioner that the committee will be embarked on an oil sands study commencing next week. I don't know whether you're aware of that, and some of these questions obviously will be raised. The Chair also, with respect to the second point from Mr. Cullen, just to that the chair will be seeking some process clarification with respect to follow-up. For example, in Madam Commissioner's report, she does refer to the Treasury Board and some of that. And what I would be suggesting at the end of the meeting is that we agree on a process of follow-up of some of the things in this report. So the chair will be seeking some direction just at the end of this meeting with respect to that. I'm going to go to the Madam Jillian, did you?
I was just going to bring a point of clarification. I would love sometime to give and share my views with you, but my mandate doesn't allow for that, so I don't want to leave any confusion that it's not by a lack of desire, but because my mandate doesn't give me that privilege.
Just so that there's no confusion, I think that we'd all love to share those views with you.
But I would like to point out that there is a definition of sustainable development in the Auditor General's Act. And if you read the definition and you look at the explanation you gave us, I think there's probably a sustainable development issue there.
Okay, thank you for that. And we'll now go to Madame Boucher.
Oui, bonjour.
Good afternoon. It's very interesting what I'm hearing this afternoon, and I have a matter that is of specific interest to me. In Chapter 1 of your report, you say that progress with respect to large industrial emitters on the greenhouse gas emission side of things is rather slow. I'd like you to give us an idea of what could be done so that we could have a successful policy for some aspects of this matter, specifically for industrial emitters. It's not up to me to suggest the type of measures that should be implemented, but what I can say, based on my experience as an auditor, there's an English expression along the lines of whatever gets measured gets done. So if you have a target set out, generally you set out mechanisms so that you can reach those objectives. You have measures and performance indicators. And if you don't have a target, then it's very difficult. You can say that there is progress, but that progress is not tangible, measurable, or you can't make a relationship, find a relationship between the goals of the program and actual efficiencies. So the first thing is to establish a goal, and then measures, and then third, to report on the issue so that Canadians can see what progress has been made. So public reports. Thank you.
Madame Boucher's time? Okay. Okay. Then we'll go to the final round, and I have Mr. Saint-Amand, Madame de Belfay, and Madame Bell, and Mr. Bennington will be splitting the time. So, Mr. Saint-Amand?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Gélinas, in your remarks today, paragraph 11, or what I have as paragraph 11, perhaps you have the same sheet, dealing with the transportation sector, you make a comment about the voluntary agreement which was entered into between the government and the auto sector. And you have a comment about voluntary agreements, that the particular agreement entered into between the government and the auto sector falls short in a few key areas. And I'm wondering, and I'm hoping I'm not steering you toward the area of policy, but wondering if you have a comment, given the urgency of addressing the issue of climate change, whether it is your view that voluntary agreements in and of themselves are likely going to be inadequate in addressing the whole issue of combating global warming climate change. Can you fairly comment on that?
I can just refer back to what we have said in the past in the Office of the Auditor General. We were not favoring one tool against another. What we are saying is that every tool will be developed as robust as possible, And if it's the right tool to achieve the objective, that's fine. But we have seen in the past, and we have looked at that voluntary agreements were not as robust as they should have been. And the most important thing in this case in particular, and it's not for me to judge if at the time it was the right tool or not, but it will be very important to have a third-party verification so that we will know if this agreement in particular is working well or not. We don't know as we speak. We haven't seen the result, but it's important that Canadians can see what are the results achieved through this particular tool.
All right. In Chapter 3 again of your report, dealing specifically with the wind power production incentive, and I'm looking at page 9 of Chapter 3, and the bold heading of one section, the wind power production incentive is progressing toward its targets. And you've earlier made mention in your remarks about how, albeit short of the targets, there was in fact considerable progress being made under the auspices of the wind power production incentive. And I'm just wondering about your reaction to NRCan's response to your recommendation 3.27. Your recommendation being NRCan should lead the development of a wind power strategy for Canada in collaboration with the provinces and wind industry. The response from NRCan seems, in my reading of it, to be charitable, on the tepid side, certainly vague, and I'm wondering if I could ask you to comment on that.
The response of natural resources is clear. First of all, if this program is to be pursued, so it's unclear what is the future of that program, there will be some more work that will be done. You have to know that there was a wind strategy in the making. NRCan has worked on that. And we have seen some of the work. There's a draft version of their strategy. They have even gone through consultation on that strategy. So you may want to know a little bit more where NRCan is at with respect to that strategy and what was the objective of the wind power strategy at the time. It would be very interesting to have an update on where the department is at.
We're just going to have to cut it at that. Thank you, Mr. Saint-Amand. And Madame Dubuffet.
Monsieur Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to reassure myself, Madame Jelena, I'm not sure that I quite heard what the interpreter said, or that I'm interpreting that properly. You told Natural Resources Canada that it should be responsible for piloting a wind energy program, the WIPI program, which was supposed to be reviewed in March 2006. That wasn't done. And Natural Resources Canada said that it was going to complete an evaluation in 2008-2009 to reassure myself about this. The government generally seems to cut a program before it assesses it. It's happened for women's programs and a host of other programs, such as EnerGuide. Are you aware of anyone stating that this program might be suspended or frozen until, according to your information? Well, based on the information we have, the funding for that program was frozen in order to carry out an assessment of it. You could certainly find out more about that if you asked the Department or Treasury Board about the issue. But what is important to add to what you said is that before we even assess a program, the department, NRCan, decided that it was going to see what type of future this program could have. And based on the new plan, it was going to look at the new plan, and so definitely the next step is to assess the program. So based on the information you have, the program, the WIPI program, would be frozen, no increases in budget. The amount is the same, or when you say it's frozen, does that mean there won't be any more? No, according to what I know, when you say frozen, that means that there won't be any money dispersed for this program. The assessment will be carried out, and then further to that, the government will make a decision. It doesn't mean that it's abolished, nor that there won't be any additional funding for it, but for the time being, there's been a stop to that so that we can do the assessment. Does that mean the program has been suspended, say, until the end of the assessment program? I don't know if the word suspended would be the right term. I don't know what my colleague would say to that.
Suspension at the moment while the funds are frozen, so they can't make any new engagements with new wind projects until a decision is rendered.
Merci. Si le temps me permet, une dernière question.
Thank you. If I have enough time to do this, I'd like to ask a final question. I don't know all departments yet, such as Treasury Board, but as a parliamentarian, as a woman, as a taxpayer, would you think it would be good for us to hear from the members of Treasury Board, for them to give us a breakdown of all the measures that are looked at for climate change in terms of financing measures, access to certain documents you might not have seen yourself? Would you recommend that to the committee members? Well, let's not confuse the matter. I think it would be quite appropriate for the committee to call Treasury Board before it. Treasury Board is a central agency. So when we need to know how much money is spent overall on climate change by the federal government, in theory, that is something that Treasury Board would do, to collect that information and disseminate it. So it could be very interesting to have that happen. But based on our experience, it would be very interesting to ask that question to Treasury Board on the type of information you are looking for, because information can't be done in a second or overnight. You really have to collect the information, especially with respect to expenditure and results. I don't know where things stands in October. I can tell you that in June it was difficult to gain access to that information, even in our work in terms of the audit. But hopefully you could make that request, and in a reasonable time frame you could get a response. At the program review phase, last year, based on that, there should be some information available, the costs, the results for all programs that were examined during the review. So we could call the Treasury Board to come in and answer questions about that whole review. Yes, thank you.
Madam Bell?
Thank you. And I'd also like to thank Madame Jelinek for her presentation and this excellent report. I just have a couple of quick questions, and Energuide and the WIPI seem to be the favorite topics today. So you've said that the Energuide program may not have had clear targets, but that it was not poorly managed, and it was on its way to meeting its 2010 goals, whatever those were. But now it's gone, it's cut. And the Minister for Natural Resources, Mr. Lund, said that last spring that it was inefficient, and that 50% of the costs for that were administration costs. And I'm just looking at the tables in the guide, or in Chapter 3, on page 6 and page 10, and I'm just hoping that I got this right, that on page 10, where you have program administration costs, and it says 24.5 is that a percentage? And just wondering, or is that millions of dollars? I'm not quite sure how.
Mr. Chair, if I may just let my colleague David just walk you through those numbers so you will understand what this is all about.
Okay.
Mr. McBain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The figures that are in this table do refer to millions of dollars. As you walk from left to right, there's the authorized funding that the department received. There's the actual payments that they have made in the form of grants or contributions. Then comes payments for what they record as operating expenses, but we broke it out into two parts because they've issued contracts directly from their operating expenses to energy evaluators. It shows up as an operating expense or potentially interpreted as an administrative expense. But in fact, those are contracts to enable the home inspections to take place. The actual program administrative costs that we're accustomed to talking about, such as staff and facilities and running data systems and that sort of thing, represent $24.5 million, or roughly 25% of the cost of the program, averaged over the period of time that are covered here.
Thank you. Okay.
So, Madam Bell, we're going to have to go to Mr. Bevington now.
My 2 minutes up already?
Yeah, 2.5. I know it goes very quickly. Sorry. Mr. Bevington?
I just have a couple of questions because, of course, your work here, Madam Jelinek, is going to probably guide in some degree in the future. And you talk about the ethanol program, and you say that the 10% gasoline compares to about 4% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. This is about. Is this this is a low figure? Are you confident with that figure? Is that a figure that has done some rigorous analysis?
That figure doesn't come from us, and I think it's a direct correlation between the production of ethanol and blended in gasoline and how we can expect in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. But here again, David can give you the detail on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner. The basis for that 4% comes from a modeling program that has been developed by Natural Resources Canada, and they can explain to you how they developed it and who they brought in to assist them with it. Basically, it is. Okay.
The second question, going back to the carbon storage, your program, you didn't analyze this and lay it out as you did the other three programs, but clearly, when you look at this program, the results, we don't see the money entered into the system, but the results coming out are very poor. Is that an indication of the ability of this program to produce results, or is it simply that the program was poorly initiated? We have results in this carbon dioxide storage initiative that are worse than any of the other programs in here. So, could I have a comment on that?
The answer is very simple, Mr. Chair. We haven't looked at this program in detail. We have very few comments to make on it.
Certainly going forward in the oil and gas industry, this has been touted as one of the most important parts of their greenhouse gas reduction strategy, and you've got a report here that shows very poor results from the test programs that you have in place. The last question I had was on wind. Did you analyze the wind program, its success based on other wind programs, such as in the United States, where the subsidy for wind energy is somewhat double what this Canadian program is?
The answer is no, but I can say, though, that in the course of the audit, when we interviewed the people in that business, we were told that this program has had a lot of support and has also stimulated investment in this area.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bevington. We're out of time there. Now, Mr. Harris, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madame Jelinek, thank you for your presentation, and a lot of interesting questions to you today. You made a comment earlier in your responses that, in effect, that in order to get something done, you should have measurements. It's measurements that where you have benchmarks set, achievable benchmarks set, that you can do your checks and balances along throughout the process, or throughout the implementation of any program. And it appears to me that in your report, although I have to be honest, I haven't read it cover to cover, but briefings on it I've had. It appears to me that you're quite clear in your assessment that the environmental and sustainable development approaches by the previous government had a profound lack of benchmarks and a way of checking the progress, a way of doing ongoing cost-benefit analysis of the money that was being spent versus the results that were being achieved. That's what I get from your report, although you may not use as strong of terms as that. But am I understanding the gist of your report and some of your comments correctly?
You're right with respect to some programs. I mean, if you want to measure, you need a target to measure against, right? So in some cases, those targets were unclear. We have mentioned that, at least for the programs we looked at. In many other areas, the measures were not even implemented. So it was very difficult for us to report on progress. The best example of that is the LFE system or the emission trading system. We don't know how much those two tools will perform because they are still under construction. So in cases like that, it's very hard to comment on how good those measures would have been because we don't know.
And I certainly appreciate that. You know, it's unable to make that assessment. This seemed to be. I remember going back to the early days of Kyoto. There seemed to be a lot of difficulty actually getting the government of the day's plan for what Kyoto was. The targets that they had set and how they were going to get there, and I guess, and as important, what it was going to cost the government over the next 10, 20 years to achieve whatever targets they thought were being set. And I think that, quite frankly, Canadian taxpayers would have a hard time determining whether they were getting any value for the tax dollars that were spent. I do agree and support your demand is probably a good word, encouragement and direction, I guess, that governments, the current government and governments to come should have solid benchmarks, solid assessment means, not just in the beginning, but to check along the progress of any environmental plans that we enter into. And speaking of that, I know that the current government has as far as the ethanol content of gasoline, they have set a target of 5% of the gasoline should consist of ethanol by the year 2010. Do you think that this is an achievable target, and well, do you think that this is an achievable target, and that they have appropriate measurements along the way between now and 2010 to know whether they're on the right track?
That I cannot tell. Concerning your latest question, let me remind everybody that we have also said that there's some good foundations to build on, and I'm sure we will all be agreed that it's not too late to do better, and we have to make sure that whatever targets we will establish in the future, the government will establish, we will have a good system in place to measure and report. And you mentioned it, I mentioned it in my report. It's public knowledge for a while that there was no strong foundation to come up with the number of 6% below 1990. So let's make sure that whatever will be the new targets, we will have a good sound analysis to explain where those targets came from and how we're going to achieve that. And I'm hopeful that the new plan will address that as part of my recommendation.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. That completes the round. We do have a little bit of time, and I'm wondering to take some direction from the committee if we could maybe go to those in the order of parties. If there's an additional, let's say, 3 minutes, that would take us through. And if it's no, we're not dealing with that. Those have just been given notice, Mr. Harris. Is that okay? All right. Let's go around, and then Mr. Cullen. And let's make it 3 minutes, Mr. Cullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to come back to the NR guide. The Deputy Minister of Natural Resources was here and said that 12 cents out of every dollar was administrative, 38 cents was the pre- and post-audit, which any reasonable person would say was required. I think the fundamental question is, was that program getting bang for the overall buck, and that would be in comparison with other alternatives. So that if the government, finally the new government, comes in and replaces this program, I'll be very curious to see what kind of evaluative tools they've used to model the fact that a new program will get better results, because we know that most of the homes were getting 30% increase in energy efficiency. But I think it is a valid question. Is that a good performance in relation to the inputs that are going to get that program? I'd like, Madam Commissioner, if you could comment on a couple of things. We hear, and frankly we hear from the other party, notions like, well, we don't really need to be worried about greenhouse gases because Canada's a bit player. What we should be doing is focusing on clean air. And clean air, as you know, is a different scenario than greenhouse gases. I mean, they're interconnected somewhat, but they're totally different concepts. We also hear that maybe there's some sectors that have to contribute more. I mean, we've heard a lot about the automotive sector, about the transportation sector. You know, frankly, and I'm not getting into a partisan statement, but I guess I am, the Minister of the Environment, I've never heard her yet talk about the contribution of the oil and gas sector. But it seems to me if we're going to deal with greenhouse gases in a real way, we're going to have to get a contribution from the large emitters, the oil and gas sector being part, the manufacturing sector, the transportation sector, and citizens as a whole. We're going to have to try to, change behavior. I wonder if you'd comment, on some of those points, and I'd just be interested in your perspective.
There's no silver bullet, and one information which is important is that in the overall plan that we have audited, half of the reduction should have come through emission trading. So emission trading was a key component of greenhouse gas reduction. And as I said earlier, it's still under construction. The other big chunk is really the auto sector and the transportation, the transportation sector and the heavy industry sector. There again, as long as we don't have clear measure, we won't be able to achieve the objective. So, I mean, you have 3 pieces there that have not been taken into consideration so far. So when you look at the target, I mean, it's hard to believe that we were going to get there. With respect to the inner guide, your question will probably find an answer through Treasury Board program review, certainly.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cullen. And I'm not sure of the order here. From the Conservatives? Anybody wish to ask any questions?
I can go for 3 minutes here.
Okay.
I was just looking over this. Just to restate again, what years was this audit done for? Just to restate again for the record, what was the period that you were covering in your...
But it's hard to say when exactly we started, because depending on programs, some programs started in 97, so we look back to 97. It's easier to say that we closed the book June 2006. Sometime we were able to have updated information until 2006, sometime 2005, sometime 2004, depending on the measures that we looked at. We could have covered 2000, 2002. So overall, I will say close to a 10-year period.
But nothing prior to 1993. That would be correct to state. Because I look at your recommendations here. They're pretty basic, pretty simple. Provide sustained leadership, integrate energy and climate change. And I just looked. There was a government that was in power that was supposedly committed to this for that length of period. And for a decade, absolutely no leadership. That seems to be the absolute raw minimum of government. Do you not agree that leadership is one of the minimum requirements of any government or any bureaucracy when dealing with this program?
What you refer to are not my recommendations. They are, let's say, food for thought.
Well, you said 5 areas you believe are crucial.
5 areas of key importance, but these are not the recommendation. The recommendations are very specific, and the government has already responded to those recommendations.
Well, I think we're nuancing here. Basically, the core lack at the top of everything was there was no leadership for over a decade.
Yeah, but that's not a recommendation per se.
That's an analysis then. An analysis then. The basic analysis of the situation for over a decade was that there was absolutely no leadership by the previous government. It wasn't just the bureaucracy, it was the government itself too that showed no leadership regardless of the rhetoric, regardless of the statements, regardless of what has been claimed. And I realize your civil service, you're supposed to be there. So,
okay.
To be fairly blunt.
I was just going to say through the chair, Mr. Trostin, we're not really getting, at this point, inquisitorial. We're just asking.
No, I was making a statement, Mr. Chair. I wasn't pushing for any response.
Right.
I realize the civil service is good and nonpartisan.
And you indicated you could fill the 3 minutes, and you have. And at that point, I think you're out of time. Madam Jellins, I'd rather go to the others because we'll run out of time, and natural justice here is, you've made your point, natural justice here is to allow the other parties to have their question.
But it's important
in the context, if you wish to get back to that, you can. But I'm going to go to the block. Who would like to ask a question? Mr. Willett.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of clarification. In your text, you stated, I can't find it, but you say that the Kyoto Protocol, which includes the emissions program and others. Well, my understanding of the Kyoto Protocol is that there is no implementation as provided by the Kyoto Protocol. In other words, every government decides on how it wants to reach those objectives, and those carbon credits are a Liberal Party solution, and I don't know whether that's a good or negative, positive or negative thing, but that has nothing to do with the Kyoto Protocol. Oftentimes, we are told that the Kyoto Protocol involves that. It doesn't necessarily. No, those are objectives under the Kyoto Protocol. At one point, it didn't seem too clear in your text, but I'm not really complaining. But in terms of management plans that you refer to in Chapter 2, you're saying that Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada focused on environment and sustainable development as one of the pillars in this area of agriculture. Could you tell us in a couple of seconds what they've done? I will defer to my colleague on that. Certainly, Mr. Chairman.
Well, one of the things that we do, we look to see when departments make commitments in those strategies, whether they actually in fact achieve them or not. Mm-hmm. And that was one in which they fell short of what they intended to do, but we were quite complimentary in the report about the fact that in that department they've taken sustainable development and tried to implement that within all of the agriculture policies in the agriculture policy framework. So it was actually an example we used to say this does show that sustainable development is working in some parts of the federal government.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, to correct something, because some people are putting words in my mouth that I haven't said. Nowhere in this report we have said that the previous government lacked leadership. We have made that comment in a forward-looking that leadership will be needed if we are to achieve our Kyoto target.
Well, thank you, Madam Jelinas and Jelena. And we're out of time on that one, too. We'll now go to the NDP. Mandel.
Great. So I was looking at page, I think, 12 and, page 12 and 14 regarding the wind power initiative. And I note that the Environment Canada maintains a wind atlas for over 40 years, which is quite a long time. And I think the first time I visited a windmill in eastern Quebec was in the year 2000. So that's, about 6 years ago. But in your report, you examine and evaluate the renewable electricity from wind power, and you made some recommendations. And given that the funds for the WIPI program are frozen, and based on the Natural Resource Canada's response to the recommendation 3.32, how does the frozen fund impact their ability to evaluate this program?
I cannot answer that question, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
You will have to ask the Department of Natural Resources the question.
Okay.
Good, and as I had said, Madam Bell, that we'll let's have a little bit of time at the end of the committee because we can follow up on those kind of things. Okay.
So do I have a bit of time left?
Sure. Yes. You do. A couple of minutes.
And so the other part of it was that in the 3.27 recommendation that Canada should lead the development of wind power strategy for Canada in collaboration with the provinces, and we see that some of the provinces don't have any capacity at this point. And the Natural Resources have said that they would have a consultation and a discussion paper. And given that there is data available for a long period of time, is that adequate? Do you think that this discussion paper is adequate? Given that also you said that Canada must act quickly on climate change, there's a time-sensitive issue here. Is there the ability, based on all this information, to move forward in a more expeditious manner?
This is one of many examples where the government should or could move much faster. I mean, there's a lot of information available with respect to WIPI. Then it becomes a policy decision if the government wants to move ahead or not. And also in the course of the audit, we were told that some provinces are much more advanced than we are in developing wind power. So the federal government will have to adjust its approach to take into consideration that new reality of some provinces moving forward faster in the area of wind power.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Well, we've exhausted that time, and I hope we haven't exhausted you, Madam Commissioner, and your colleagues.
I can go for another hour if you want.
I can see that. I can see that. I guess it's us that are exhausted. But we have run out of time, and we do appreciate you being here. And the balance of the discussion very quickly is how we deal with your, at least your presentation here today. So I'm going to thank you and your colleagues on behalf of the committee. And I'm going to now take it back into the committee. Members of the committee, it seems to me, if I may, that there are a few obvious questions that are raised out of Ms. Jelina's comments. I've just noted a couple of them. One was that question raised with respect to the response that was received from finance. On a petition. Now, this is a citizen's petition, and the commissioner is indicating concerning subsidies to the oil and gas industry that she's not satisfied with the response. That's an example to me that in terms of closing the accountability loop that we really should act on that. She's recommending that the committee may wish to get Finance Canada to clearly explain the extent to which the sector is subsidized. The other thing, two questions that are raised, and I think members have raised it, is what is on under 27, what progress is made in developing a system of collecting and reporting information on expenditures and results. That was one issue that was raised. Also about Treasury Board-led review of climate change programs and how is it being shared horizontally across departments. I wonder if I could suggest this. If I may, Madame Belfoy, if I could. I'll try and do this very quickly. My suggestion would be that we have our research meet informally with the vice chairs and the chair next week. And if members wish to attend that, fine. But I'm going to, on behalf of the committee, just ask research if they would go over Madam Commissioner's report and pick out those things that we could then look at for follow-up, and then ask the committee if they wish to do that. So I've given 3 examples for follow-up, but it would be up to the committee. Okay, any discussion on that, Mr. Cullen?
I think that's a good idea, Mr. Chairman, but I think there's a couple of obvious witnesses that we should call. One is Finance Canada, the other one is the Treasury Board.
Recommended
and
right
so
here.
I would suggest that we should just agree to invite them, and
well, you see,
they could come together in one panel, Finance Canada and Treasury Board.
The problem is that, you know, it's highly irregular with respect that some of the members have had to are not here. And my suggestion is that we would meet Tuesday. We could come back with that report. And I don't think that we do have the oil sands deputations that have been confirmed that are coming, Mr. Cullen. And I think it would give the opportunity for members to look at prioritize who we'd like to come in and give them some advance notice. And I'm sure we could get into that. But I really would try to avoid at this point motions being put, because there was nothing on the agenda that was going to indicate that we would raise that here, in fairness. And I think that we could move expeditiously next week since we have our agendas filled. Okay? Mr. Trost?
Just to say, I think your idea is eminently fair, and I think it also gives us a little bit of time to go back and rethink through our notes and so forth. I mean, I know I've scattered notes here, there, and everywhere.
I'm just being informed. I forgot that it's a break week next week, so but we'll get on with it. Madam Bell?
Next sitting week.
Yeah, we won't be here next week.
That was going to be my point.
Okay, well, you know, but I would like to, you know, from past experience, it is all, you know, we avail ourselves of the best, you know, advice we can take, and it's usually our research people that put that together for us and give our research a chance to digest what Ms. Jelinek has also raised. Madame de Belfoy?
Oui, je suis en accord.
Yes, I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, that we do a review of these issues. But it is quite obvious to me that there are some unavoidable witnesses in the sense of Finance or Treasury Board certainly should come before us. The Commissioner talked to us about sustainable development strategies and that there's a report to come and that these are going to be assessed. Because sustainable development has been set out as a study matter, I think that we have to bear that in mind, given the fact that we've made a decision regarding sustainable development, if everyone's in agreement with that.
I think that the comments can be taken into consideration from our research and incorporated into the sort of a draft follow-up paper from the Commissioner's report. And I think that's what we want. We'd like something to work on. Mr. Cullen?
I'm just going to add that nothing that we have to worry about today, but if we are going to invite, let's say, Treasury Board, the Treasury Board Secretary, we've already heard from some of the witnesses that there was a certain level of Treasury Board evaluation, and then there was a report that went to the Cabinet. So what we want to avoid is having the Treasury Board Secretariat come here, for example, to the committee to be told that they cannot discuss the report because it's a Cabinet confidence. So if that is the case, I would suggest that we invite the Minister as well.
So we'll take that under consideration, but I think research can help us. They have a little experience on this too. Mr. Paradis?
Oui, je comprends la remarque.
I understand my colleague's remarks. I agree. But, Mr. Chairman, if I understand, you had expected to have a meeting ahead of time with the researchers and the concerned individuals, and so that we wouldn't have, when we have the people ahead of us, we would get the responses to the question. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not suggesting, Mr. Paradis, that we should have any individuals in other than members of the committee. And I'm suggesting to begin with, it's the 2 vice chairs and the chair to meet with research. Research now is looking at the Ms. Jelenek's report and to make some suggestions as to follow-up. And then we would present that to the committee at our first meeting. But it would be up to the committee still to decide whether they, it may be obvious to us all that Treasury Board should come in and there should be, questions and so on. But I'm not presupposing that as chair on behalf of the committee. It's the committee that will decide that. But I think that you should have something in front of you as research has digested this as to who and what should be asked of departments out of Ms. Jelines's comments here.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, Ms. de Bethoy?
Une clarification.
Just a point of clarification. Tuesday, after the break week, the motion that was tabled today, are we also going to be hearing from witnesses on the oil sands and the follow-up to the commissioner's report? Is that what on the same day? Is that what I understood, or?
No. We are having deputations a week Tuesday on our oil sands framework that was agreed upon through committee at the last meeting. That is going ahead. And we will have the consideration of the motions. Those are separate. What I'm suggesting is possibly a week Tuesday or even Monday, we'll have to see, but the research will have an opportunity to look at Madam Commissioner's report and to make suggestions to an informal committee, and I'm suggested the two vice chairs and the chair, to review what research is looking at in terms of follow-up and present that back to the committee. It will be it'll be an action plan, if you will, of Madam Commissioner's comments. There may be things that are missed by research. You can bring that up, but my feeling is that there's some obvious things, but I'm suggesting on behalf of the committee that we don't get into a discussion of that. We give research an opportunity to digest and then present some follow-up actions to us. But it's up to committee to decide whether they wish to follow those actions or suggest some others. But we've heard this now. Let's digest it. We have a week. We also have our agenda for a week in advance, and we have the notices of motion. We have all kinds of work, but I think that we also want to lay out our future initiatives in terms of closing the accountability loop here with the Commissioner's report. Okay. Okay. Mr. Cullen?
With respect to the oil sands study, a number of lists were, I guess, sent to you in terms of potential witnesses. Has that program been put in place, or will we have the committee have a final look at which witnesses are planned to be summoned? Or
I'm going to have to ask the clerk if he would like to respond to that. I haven't been involved in that.
The lists have been submitted to me, and I have contacted the department to appear the week as per the committee's recommendation. And we have scheduled someone else for that week, but on that, I will be circulating a calendar, much like I did in the spring, and the committee will be able to contact myself and the chairman in the meantime to recommend that someone be added or someone be taken away. But there will be a calendar.
So there will be a calendar we can look at.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Sure,
I'm just working on kind of organizing the puzzle right now.
Right. Okay. Good. All right. The time being 5:30. No more business before the chair. We're adjourned.